Cecil Noble Mannette.
And what did he do?
Telegrapher.
And who did he work for?
He worked for, well, eventually his life's ambition that he worked for Trans-Canada Airlines, right? But first he was in the Merchant Marine during the Second World War. My grandfather didn't want to be on the farm, so this is his telegrapher.
Okay, let's
see.
Let's zoom out on this. And you're holding in your hand a
telegrapher's key.
And show us how it works there.
How it works? You sat down with your hand here.
Just like the movies.
Yeah. And you set the adjustments to your... Every telegrapher had a handprint, and you could tell just by the way the guy hit the key and how fast he went between each. After you listened to nothing but clicks all the time, you could tell each telegrapher had a certain imprint. And you could always tell who it was, but how fast, how slow. Certain letters they would trip up on, like an S, it would be 2 taps or something like this. They could always tell. Everything you read about the Second World War in telegraphy, they knew who was sending most of it. Like if the shipping lines.
Oh, seriously?
They had 5 guys, employees who worked the telegraph.
Wow.
Then the guys there knew, oh, that's Fred. Listen, they could tell.
Oh, yeah, it's just like...
And you think of certain letters, it'd be tap, 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 tap. They were short, long, and 3 shorts, 1 long. That was a letter. And you got really good at going at it. But there'd always be one you kind of flip over every time.
And your dad was, because of this, had the nickname. Yeah, Sparky.
Yeah. And you could tell who they were. If they were Merchant Marine friends, then they would call them Sparky. And the women always called them Sparky because, I don't know, they like that connection. Sparky.
What did they call you if you were in the Navy? And
telegraphers were telegraphers.
Yeah, but you said that he was a Merchant Marine. They called him Sparky.
Yeah, they all call anybody who was on a telegrapher's key was Sparky, right? And we lived in a military town, so Nova Scotia, and everybody knew you, and that was my dad's original. That would date people. Later on, if you went somewhere and you met new people, he didn't say he was Sparky, but the people who knew him from before, from the 40s and 50s when he was doing that, right?
So your dad went from the Merchants Marine to...
Well, to backtrack, my dad grew up on a farm. My grandfather did not let my father milk the cows or do farm-like chores. He didn't want him doing that. My dad was very good in school, had good scholasticity, unlike his son, right? and my father was in the one-room schoolhouse, and then my father paid, and that was a lot of money then, for my dad to go to radio school, because he did not want my father to become a farmer. He wanted his son to do way better than that, and my dad did, in that context, right? So and he wasn't alone. Some of his best friends went there also. Don White, my godfather, he was a telegrapher also. And then Air Canada, which was started in 1938 when my dad was finished with the war. When he came back from the Merchant Marine, he dawdled on the West Coast and had a chauffeur's license and delivered magazines for the province, newspapers, right? And then eventually he got a job with Air Canada, and that's where he was posted in Lethbridge.
No, he got a job with Air Canada. Wasn't around back then.
Trans-Canada Airlines started in 1938.
Yeah, Trans-Canada
So the
Airlines.
end of the war was 1945. Then for 1 year, he was out in the ocean 1 more year, 46. Then they went to Lethbridge, and that's where I was born. And he worked for Air Canada. Lethbridge, TCA, Trans-Canada Airlines.
And you recall how long you lived in Lethbridge before you moved?
Months, probably.
Months.
I did not remember that. You might remember that.
Yeah, I think I have it figured out.
I was on the teat then, Ted, and I don't remember that either. But I was told that when we flew on DC-3s and Lodestars, that we flew between the mountains and you had to go on oxygen. And my mom took a baby, who was me. Maybe that explains a lot of what happened to my mind. And then you had to be on the mask, and you would and then give it to the child, give it back and forth, right? And they flew through the Rockies at that time because no planes weren't pressurized. North Star was not a pressurized aircraft, and neither was the DC-3, nor was the Lockheed Lodestar.
Yeah, because this was 1947, 1948.
Yeah, up through that era. Right?
Yeah. And up here in Canada, which was even more in the outback back then.
Yeah, and then my father put in for a transfer and was transferred to which he wanted.
And we know the date because we have the bank book, or you have the bank book, which I copied, scanned of the mortgage for the Yarmouth house.
Yeah, for the Yarmouth house and the Dartmouth one. I think we have that too.
So that's when, which we did discuss. So, but talking about your dad, so your dad was, you mentioned before, he's the diplomat.
Yeah.
He was good with numbers and money.
There's no way you can talk about my mom and dad without thinking them as a couple. If you talk about them individually, it's kind of not there. But when you talk about how they were with each other and their relationship and how it formed the pair of them and how their relationship brought out the best in both of them. They brought out the best in each other. And that's, I'll always think of my mom and dad as that. If you sat alone with my mom or my dad, when I was an adult, not when I was a kid, but when I was an adult, right? There wasn't much to talk about. You always talk to them together as a couple. And then it sang.
So your mom was in charge of the wooden spoon and your dad was in charge of...
My mother was a household engineer, and by God, she took it seriously. She studied it. She brought the kids up, and she talked to my dad about some of it, but he did not want to have anything to do with it, especially the discipline and the upbringing. That was the wife's job.
Did your dad ever discipline you?
She made him once, and he hated it. So
yeah.
that experiment went bad. That was the end of that. Yeah. Don't do that again, Larry. That's all. And if you keep it up, I'm going to put you back on your mother's care. So.
Yeah.
That's pretty well how it went.
I'll give her a bigger wooden spoon.
Yeah, no, I'll tell her she can do other things to you. No, my dad was not liking to be in corporal punishment or anything like that. Not at all. He was the least... He was not a violent man.
So your interaction with your dad, how was he patient-wise in that? Like, when you were kids, you know...
My dad was so patient that we could get him mad, and he would go and complain to my mother that we were teasing him.
Yeah.
And then we felt bad, right? Especially when your father goes and says that. Gene, they're doing this.
He basically was at the same level as you guys.
Yeah.
He went complaining to mom.
Yeah, he went to her and just said, like, in other words, you're not doing a good job because they're teasing me and bugging me, so step up.
No, I see.
No, that's the way I interpret it now, right?
So your dad, he was patient and quiet. You guys could make a lot of...
My father wasn't quiet. My father was knowledgeable. You put him in a room with other adults, right? He led the room. He was the most knowledgeable guy, but he wasn't like me. He wasn't the mouthpiece. But if you asked him, he knew.
Who was the mouthpiece? Your mother?
Yeah, my mother was, but then when my father spoke, she shut up because he had a presence. My father had the intelligence. And when he was in with the crowd, they listened because he knew what he was talking about. And he surprised everybody else because, of course, they think, you know, married to Jean, that you're going to be the little toadstool. He was not at all. Yeah, but if the light went on my father, then he knew the subject and he talked about it. And my mother didn't or whatever. She was proud of him and she was happy to have him have the spotlight per se. But my dad didn't take the spotlight. It was... Nobody was, if they were wrong, I'm sorry, no, that's wrong what you said. And he would, and my father had a magnificent memory. He could remember everything. He was incredible in that way. And if people were arguing or fighting, my dad, everybody knew my dad. He was the fairest man they'd ever met. He never, ever judged. If he hated somebody, they probably didn't know. But he could ignore them.
If he even hated anybody, he was...
Well, oh no, there were people who deserved it, but he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of them knowing that he disliked them. It's like being ignored. There's nothing worse than to be ignored. Nothing. You can hate somebody and scream at him is better than if you're in the room and you like him, you would talk to him. They hadn't earned his respect, so that was that. And that's a true diplomat who can do that kind of stuff, right? And they didn't hate him for it. They respected him, whatever. That's just how my father was. And in the workplace, they would put him with the difficult guys, and they became friends. Fritz was one of them. Fritz McCulloch, McAuliffe, whatever his name was, right? He was a difficult man. And my dad and Fritz shared many a shift together. And Fritz was never late or whatever because he respected my father, because my dad never judged him. My dad didn't really like him, but he didn't dislike him. But my father earned Fritz's respect. And Fritz would argue with other workers that he was with, and they would always be making problems between them. Not with my father. He wouldn't he didn't want to hurt my dad in that way because that was wrong. And my dad could do that. That was his gift.
Mm.
He was good at it. And I heard that from many people.
Your dad had that major accomplishment.
My dad loved his grandchildren, and my dad would go out and my dad would lay down on the lawn and make snow angels, and my dad would read Christmas stuff. He had no standards at all, and the kids just loved it. And they just knew that he cared for them a lot, and they go, oh, granddad, in those ways, right?
Your father worked, your father worked 30 some years without a sick day.
Yeah. 35 years, not one day absent from work. Yeah. I think it was 38 in the end, but it was 35, 38. I got the letter here. We're talking 3 years, which was nothing, right? And my dad would say he was lucky enough to be sick on his days off.
So your dad grew up on the farm, and you've got lots of great farm memories.
Well, my dad had pneumonia, and he was out of school for a whole year, and he was bedridden. And that's when he built that airplane up there. That's one of the things that he did. And he also did a balsa mosquito.
Okay.
You want me to bring the plane down here?
Let's take a look. That's the closest we can get into it.
It doesn't like that?